Hello, folks and friends. Today I'm going to be musing about bonds between siblings. This is something that I feel pretty strongly about and I'm passionate about. One, because I only had one sibling myself. I think it would have been so beautiful to have other siblings. I have a lot of good friends. My exposure through college was encountering all of these large Catholic families that all had a multiplicity of children and lots of siblings. And I just thought that was, just an awesome dynamic and, love that for myself. And here I am as our family is growing and our four boys are close together in age. It's something that I really want to cultivate in them. It's also just a beautiful thing because your family, the family that you're creating, you're giving your children all a pretty similar formation, most likely. And so they have each other against the whole world, so to speak, you know, that they have such allies in this world, journey alongside each other, hopefully have families alongside each other as well. Just having that kind of bond and that beauty of siblings that God has created, just to really cultivate that in them. I'm just going to be sharing a bit about a few things that we kind of do to cultivate that. Some of it is intentional, like we make an intention to do it. Some of it is their own personality, their own just childlike love that God has placed in their hearts that they kind of have that disposition towards each other. But I'm just gonna, yeah, share about a few things that we kind of do to help cultivate that and um, hopefully make that a long lasting attribute of our family. First thing though is that I said that this is something that means a lot to me and a lot to my husband. And when it comes to just, yeah, the kind of thinking about the vision of your family, I do think it's a good thing and an important thing to kind of ask yourself, what kind of family values do we want to have? What kind of vision do we have for our family in terms of just the heart that we're trying to cultivate in them? So, for example, maybe it's really important to you and your spouse that you are very generous in terms of your service towards other people, just reaching out to others, welcoming people into your home. Maybe you really want your kids to be super thoughtful and observant and reflective. And these are smaller examples, but maybe something that you want to kind of cultivate in your home is that it's easy for your children, for you, for everybody in the family to say, I love you to each other very easily. And hopefully all of the above, but there's obviously just going to be things that naturally you and your spouse in your own personalities and your own interests and experiences, you're going to have certain things that you want to be a part of your family culture. And I think that's just a really good thing to talk about, to ask yourselves, what vision do we have for our family? What kind of family culture do we want to create? What kind of dynamic do we want to create? And how are we going to go about doing that? So one of those things for us is having strong sibling bonds with each other and with us as parents. That's really important to us. I want our kids to enjoy each other, to be able to be vulnerable with one another, to desire to hang out each other, just to be with one another and hang out, especially as they get older, especially if they're all dudes. I want them to be able to have each other as confidants in the different things that they're struggling in, because there's gonna come a point, especially when they're older. I'm very aware that, mom and dad are not gonna be necessarily the first people they might want to run to. Hopefully, and that's definitely the goal, is that they're going to come and run to us and that we're gonna be able to have, conversations and important things that need to get addressed. There's that own openness and a vulnerability there. But it might be very likely, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, that, they go to their sibling first to kind of confide in, maybe get some guidance, get some counsel, some comfort. And I want them to be able to be comfortable doing that with one another. I realize, and I realize that we're such babies in the realm of parenting still, but I do strongly believe that the foundation, the trajectory of family life starts here in what you're doing and in the younger years. Whatever attitude and disposition you're cultivating now, you're still going to need that. The conviction and the passion, you're still going to need that. You're just going to need it in different forms. And I'm very aware of that. But, anyways, the goal is to start strong and finish strong, is kind of the name of the game here. So, anyways, here are some things in this season we're being intentional about with our young children. And the first is that it all kind of starts in the womb. So we actually have another baby on the way right now. We're due in September. That's something that we do kind of naturally, and I think everybody kinda does this naturally, but I do, when I'm thinking about it, try to be mindful of it, is the belly is kind of the manifestation of the baby for our children right now, and so, again, a lot of people, I think, do this naturally, right? You, like, kiss the baby, you let your children, rub your belly or hug your belly, kiss your belly, like, that's all part of, kinda cultivating a bond and a relationship, and I kind of like to play on that where my belly is sort of like the child, and I know some people are kind of protective about their bellies, but within reason. For me, I kinda utilize my belly as a talking point for my kids, like, their baby sister in my belly right now talks to them, like, w I'll encourage them to bring their Lego creations or things like that to my belly to show the baby what you made, and I'll kinda mimic and talk from my belly and be like, "That looks great," or something like that. Um, and I encourage them to make stuff for the baby, but it's just prepping them, right? Getting them used to the fact that there is another person that is going to be entering into our family. This person is already a part of the family dynamic so that when they're actually born, it's not that much of a stark transition for them. Yeah, I mean, it is obviously gonna be different when there's an actual baby outside of the womb, but they've been talking to this person. This person has been, in a sense, talking to them for a long time, and, and when I mean, like, I get my belly involved, like, I get the baby involved, it's like I play tag with them, with the baby, like, I'll use my belly and, like, kinda bump the kids and, like, I'll chase them around and, say that the baby's chasing them, and, it's like and they really interact with my belly as if their sibling is literally on the outside already, and it's so beautiful to see them do that and already kind of conceptualize that in their heads. Are 4 like, our oldest is 4, which is old, like, it's relatively old, like, he's mature and understands a lot of things. But he's also still young, and so is my 3-year-old and my 2-year-old. But already, even though baby is not gonna be here for a while, they're already making room for for their sibling on the couch. Like, we're about to read a book, and they're like, "Oh, make more room, make more room. We need to make room for the baby," which there is no baby there, it's me, but they they there is, like, an empty space very often in their play, or they're making a nest with, like, our sofa cushions or something like that, and they always, like, leave room for the baby. And so they're mindful of them, and they're always asking about them, talking about them, excited about it. Anyways, and so we really just encourage that because when the baby comes, it is a transition for the children, but it's not that hard of a transition. Might also be because of my kids' personalities. I definitely recognize that. And, we're having a girl this time, so that transition for them might be different as well. But we've never really had a hard time having a new baby enter into our home and our children kind of, not being excited or having a hard time swallowing that, there's another baby, which means attention taken away from them potentially. And so that kind of leads into my next point is that I'm very aware of my disposition, my attitude while I'm pregnant, and I try to really communicate and definitely want to make sure I'm messaging to the kids that another sibling is a really exciting thing. It's something that we're celebrating and that we're really joyful about. Because already at a very young age, children feel the burden, hear the fear or the complaints or the stresses that you have. And that can not set them up to believe that another baby is going to be a good thing. It can translate to them that another baby is going to mean a more stressed out mommy, divided time and attention. Not that you have to fake it or anything, but especially as the pregnancy gets on and it's getting harder and, things are more difficult, to make sure to not frame the baby and having this baby as if I can't be available to you anymore, or even something like being overprotective about your belly to some degree. I mean, I've never really seen somebody do that. I don't really know what that would look like, but I'm just saying, I'm giving an example that just like our attitude and our way of handling and reacting towards our pregnancy kind of gives off the impression for our kids whether or not it's something exciting and something, joyful and something to look forward to. Because I have heard, and there are definitely children out there who feel a little hesitant or don't necessarily aren't super fans of the idea of another sibling, not just because their time and attention is going to be divided or they're going to get less of it, but sometimes it's even just a well, one, I've definitely heard where it's like the children feel the burden of another child because it's like they are unjustly maybe given too much responsibility. Like mom and dad are not kind of stepping up to plate, taking on the responsibilities that they're supposed to, and things that aren't supposed to fall onto the children get pushed onto them. And so they don't see having another sibling come into the picture another joy because they see that as a job for them. It's going to be work for them if they have another sibling, or that they don't really their mom isn't really a nice mommy when they're pregnant. And so they don't look forward to the fact that mommy's pregnant and therefore translate that they don't necessarily look forward to having another sibling, even though obviously when the baby's out, mommy's different and hopefully better and is in a state of, have more capacities and more capabilities in a physical manner. But, it just sets a precedence for them that if they feel like you're, kinda, like, being a drag about your pregnancy and kinda complaining about the baby a lot and not making it seem like there's something to be excited about and celebrate, and it's a huge blessing for them, another sibling, another person they get to play with, another person they get to, have fun with. If you're not kinda setting them up to have that attitude towards it, then it's very likely that they might not feel like that. So, just to be mindful of setting a tone. Our youngest takes about usually like a week or so to adjust to having a new baby, but very quickly they love the baby and it's their baby. Like they see that baby as their own. When we have another baby come into the picture, our youngest is pretty young. So I've always been really grateful. I've always been really aware of that too when the baby comes that, of course, you want them to be gentle, but, like, not to be too extra about, kind of protecting the baby as this thing that is almost untouchable by the youngest child. I mean, I trust my youngest child, in the sense that he's I believe that we've kind of set it up that he knows to be gentle, he knows to be, soft and tender with the baby, but just, like, not to be too overboard about that because it can sometimes create a division where it feels like they're not allowed to touch the baby or they're not, like, almost like the baby is not their friend, so to speak. So, anyways, just being mindful of that. The next thing that we kinda do is give our children the vocabulary to speak to each other, and I see that as part of creating sibling bonds because the ability to communicate with one another is so important. It can be something where, siblings don't really talk to each other. They don't know how to talk to each other, like, even though they should because they're siblings, and you maybe assume that it feels natural and easy to be around each other to talk to each other, but that's not necessarily the case. So already from a young age, we try to, like, give our kids vocabulary and give them our kids like, kinda just set them up to having conversations with one another. But some examples would be this, like, if my kids are fighting, I'll take the time to teach them how to articulate that they don't appreciate what's going on. Saying something like, "Hey, I worked hard on this thing, and you destroying it makes me really sad." Something like that. Like, just, like, being able to kind of have like, for them to know why even, like, them themselves to be able to articulate why they're upset to them. It's not just because, "Oh, I didn't like that." It's true that they obviously didn't like it, but it's because they worked hard on that thing, like, something like a bit more giving them another layer to that. And then with that, teaching them how to resolve conflict with one another that, you don't have to just separate the kids all the time when they're not fighting, but, like, teach them how to play together. Teach your older child, for example, our oldest, teaching him how to creatively navigate when his younger siblings are not cooperating very well in play or they're kind of destroying his stuff or tampering with his things and kind of teaching him to be attuned to or observant a bit to like kind of what's going on. It's not necessarily that your younger sibling is just a malicious child. Maybe he is. That's not always true. He's not just being malicious, but he wants what you're creating and he doesn't know how to do that. So taking a few seconds to like build something or help him build something or create something for him, and that your, creation gets protected. Like Lincoln and I definitely have like pulled our oldest aside and been like, here's the game plan. Here's like a way that you can kind of go about this. And it doesn't like, don't get me wrong, like it doesn't work 100% of the time. But I've definitely seen my oldest like navigate when his younger siblings are becoming more of a liability rather than an asset, and he flips the situation on them and tries to make it to something for good. Like that's what something I want him to cultivate as a character in himself, but that also to be able to teach them how to be together, how to work together. That's, I think, a really important thing. Another thing would be giving our children, yeah, the vocabulary to speak to one another in a kind of like mature manner. So, for example, we encourage our kids to say please and thank you, or, excuse me. It's obviously a very common thing. But we don't have to stop there, right? Like we can kind of frame their vocabulary however we want. Like, for example, when um our kids, give something up for the other person, or, they do something that's worth saying thank you, like giving them a toy or something like that, to be like, "Oh, like, that was so generous," to say something like, "Oh, that was so generous of your sibling. Can you say thank you for your generosity?" Like, something like that, where it's just like, again, just giving an extra layer to it, giving it a bit more depth where your kid has, like, a more mature vocabulary so that they can talk to one another. Like, I love hearing my kids talk to each other and, you know, s pass each other a toy and be like, "Hey, do you want this thing? This thing would look so awesome on the fire truck you're building." "Oh, yeah, thanks. Oh, that's so generous of you." Like something like that. And it's such a joy for a parent to hear your children being able to talk to each other in such a joyful and like mature manner. So, anyways, doing something like that. Or when we're in the car, obviously the kids always want to talk to mom and dad, to point out things to mom and dad, show them the tractor, the digger, every single tractor that they see every minute, and that's a beautiful thing, that's great, and obviously sometimes this is dual purpose, don't get me wrong, but it's also nice for them to be like, "Hey, next time you see a really neat tractor, you should tell Theo about it. Theodore would love to hear about, the things you're seeing." And then it's like all of a sudden it switches from talking to mom and dad 24/7 to talking to your sibling and being like, "Hey, Theodore, look at this thing. Whoa, I just saw this thing." And then they're talking amongst each other. And it's a very basic conversation. It's just a beautiful thing to be able to get them to shift their focus on communing with each other. Is a really nice thing. Another thing that we try to do is create scenarios in play, like when we're playing together, or situations just where they serve and work together. So in terms of service, like maybe it's, and again, a lot of these things are dual purpose too, not just because I'm trying to relieve because it partially relieves some of my need to intervene and to do stuff. And so it trains them to help them to be more independent. But that, you're teaching them that they're capable of doing things themselves, and they're also capable of helping each other. So in terms of service, like to send the kids outside, it's like I'll lay the coats out and be like, if you need help, ask your brother to help you. Ask one of your brothers to help you. Or, you need help taking off your shoes, ask your brother to help you. He's capable of helping you. And it's interesting how, I mean, I guess they're close in age, so things kind of even out a bit. But it's not just my oldest having the burden, so to speak, of taking care of everybody, but actually my second oldest is very speedy in in getting ready and doing everything. And often he's the one who's helping my oldest get ready to go outside. So, just like giving that, like to help each other and making it a joyful experience. Obviously, you can definitely like direct these kinds of scenarios in a way where it doesn't feel like a joy for the kid. It feels like a chore. Maybe they feel kind of like a slave. And so definitely the way you go about it makes a lot of the difference. You can be doing the same thing, telling your kids to go help each other in a manner where it sounds very bossy and unpleasant, or you can direct your kids to help each other in a manner where it's joyful and loving. And actually, your sibling really appreciates that, and they're so grateful to have you in their life. Like you can frame it the way you want to. Often at meal times, when the younger siblings or the younger kids are they drop like a million things, we ask them, "Hey, are you willing? Are you willing to be generous and to pick up this thing for your sibling?" And they do it, and they enjoy doing it. Especially at this age, kids are just naturally helpful. They want to do things. They want to be capable. They want to serve. And so to utilize that in a way that builds them up, and makes them love their sibling more is a great asset. And to utilize that well, it can be a little exhausting. Don't get me wrong, to like remember to do this all the time. But if when you do think about it, when you're being intentional about it, hopefully it's so beautiful to see the fruits of giving your kids the vocabulary of them, saying like serving each other, like getting a snack for them or something like that, and to hear them say of their own accord to each other, "Thanks so much for loving me and being so generous." Like that, and they probably are not going to talk like that a decade from now. But creating that heart towards each other, I think is a good thing. It's a beautiful thing to pursue. And so many basic ways, like there's so many opportunities to set up your children to serve each other. Like, for example, it's like you're gonna give one child a snack or something like that, and it's like, "Oh, go ask your sibling if they want a snack." And of course they're gonna want a snack. But you give them by sending the other child, you give them the credit of being able to get that for them, and then, bring it to them. And then naturally they just again, it becomes kind of part of their nature if you are constantly doing that, reinforcing that kind of behavior, just like any kind of behavior you're trying to cultivate in your child. And naturally, they'll just start remembering their sibling naturally. Today I set out a package of cookies. I went to the washroom, and my second oldest had already divided. I didn't tell him to do anything. I told him to wait, which he didn't wait, but he was doing something loving in the meantime. So it was okay, which was, he took the cookies out and he separated into 3 different piles, 2 cookies for, his younger sibling and his older sibling. And he did that of his own accord. So, it's just like a thoughtfulness that I think has, again, might just like may also be partially his personality, but it is something that we're intentional about. And so I think that comes from that. It comes from that too. It's even just like teaching our kids social skills, for example, right? Like when our kids when our kids get hurt, or when our youngest kids get hurt, and if there are other siblings around, or it makes sense, like if the scenario makes sense, like to encourage them to be, or they're playing all together and one falls to the ground, like to not just comfort the younger, but then also call the olders to you and be like, "Hey, this is how you properly tend to somebody who has been hurt." You don't just run away and keep playing. You come back and you say, "Hey, are you okay? Is there something that I can do for you? Do you need water? Can I get you a toy?" Whatever. And that hopefully is not just going to translate to their relationship with their other siblings, but to people in general, other children that they interact with, or just being mindful of that, not even just other children, maybe even adults, right? Like there are going to be times where your children, hopefully, if they have those gifts and like those characters built into them, that they'll have that kind of mature attunement to older people around them, and be able to serve not just people of their own age, but people who are older than them, older than they are as well. The next thing that we do to cultivate sibling bonds is actually something my husband does really well. I have learned so much from my husband when it comes to playing, just good ideas of how to cultivate these kind of mature and real like world characteristic traits in our kids. My husband is just a very naturally good player. And it's not like he plays really well with the kids. He's super creative. He frames things in a way that I think really helps challenge our kids to think in a mature manner. And so I learned so much from him and how he interacts with our children. And I ask him, because we also have all boys right now, like, what's the best way to go about, like, this is a kind of virtue I want to instill in our children. As a man, men. So, and our children are men. What do you think is a good way to go about this? And like kind of seeking his counsel to get ideas of how to enforce these things in our family throughout the day. So, anyways, it's not uncommon to find my husband playing with our children with play clothes. He's wearing play clothes that are far too small for him, and he naturally does this on his own accord. But it's really attributed, I think, to the kids is love for each other, and kind of this, like they do genuinely enjoy playing together. They they're pretty aware of the other, kind of mindful, especially our oldest. But and again, I do think that's part of his personality. He's very observant and reflective. But my husband very, and I say this because I this is not something we intentionally did. This is something my husband has just done. But I remember seeing it and noticing it and being like, please do more of that. I think that's been really good for our kids. Which is, he'll just naturally like grab one of the children. And again, from a young age, our babies are pretty involved in quote unquote rough playing. I mean, they're not doing anything, but even when the babies are very small, like it's like newborn, even sometimes to a point where I'm sometimes uncomfortable. But it's for 2 months or 3 months. It's like, my husband will kind of utilize them something. He's captured that baby, and like they're all trying to fight to like save the baby. So they have to, they band together. They have to work together, and they have to fend off daddy all together. And especially when my husband is doing an activity that's kind of more daring for the kids, he'll really encourage them to cheer the other one on and, call out like, "Oh, you're strong and brave. You can do it," and just kind of building camaraderie between them that way. Again, like that, making from a young age, incorporating the baby into the play. It's in their minds like the baby has always been here. Like the baby is not just like this separate entity, this kind of unknown creature that doesn't ever interact with them and it's kind of like so distant from them. It's like no, the baby's there with them in the way that they can be there. And it's so fun as the baby gets a bit older and more interactive. The kids see that, they enjoy that and try to incorporate them all the more. My children all are well, my 2 oldest are potty trained and they wear boxers, right? But, like, it's so funny how this has happened on more than one occasion where and, like, they're boys, so it's hot, or summer's coming and, they're all dressed for the day, and then for whatever reason, they all come around the corner and they're all in their boxers. They decided to get undressed. But then, they commission it's not just the older 2, because the older 2 kinda have the ideas together, and then they usually enforce that on the youngers. But then it's like they'll make like, they'll, like, strip down the babies. They'll strip like, next thing I'll know, I'll, like, look over at the baby, who is, like, our youngest right now is crawling right now, and, like, they had taken off all his clothes, and he's wearing a diaper, but he's wearing boxers, and so is my 2-year-old. And, like, they did that. They initiated that. They made him a part of, like, what they're doing. And I love that. I love seeing my kids, like, being like, wanting to incorporate, every member of the family, every all of their brothers, like, into the fold of what they're doing, and it doesn't matter how young they are. They're gonna try to make him look like one of them, even though he definitely is still in a diaper, and he's not gonna be out of a diaper anytime soon. So, anyways, that's a joy. Something that my husband and I are pretty big on is recognizing that, yes, you have children as a collective whole, like we have children and we're raising our children, but we're also raising individual people. And to remember that, because it's easy, especially as you have more children, to kind of like lump them together and forget that they're also individual people with individual needs and to be aware of those dynamics and of those things as they get older and to realize that we're not just forming our children, a group of people, we're forming different individual children are going to need different things. So something else we try to do to cultivate sibling bonds, this may not seem related, but I do think this is related, is kind of the same way that if you as a parent don't find your children a pleasure to parent, a pleasure to be around because of whatever their behavior or whatever they're like, and maybe it's the stage they're at, whatever it may be, but in general, if you don't enjoy being around your kids, I believe that naturally your children wouldn't find it pleasurable to be around each other. So it's really important for us to create in our kids behavior, a character that is not just enjoyable for us as parents, to parent and to be around, but that their siblings enjoy. I don't enjoy when, our one of our children are throwing a tantrum or acting out and being loud and crying and whatever. Like if I don't like that, their siblings probably don't like enjoy being around them when they're like that. And so it's really important for us to be diligent in disciplining our kids, cultivating in them a good character that they enjoy being around each other. And I do think part of cultivating that behavior, cultivating the character that they have, is treating our kids like they're capable, mature people that have dignity, that are capable of understanding larger concepts that can be spoken to in a sort of, I guess if you sort of call it adult like manner. That they are able to be mature. They are able to play together well and have fun together because they don't just act like uncontrollable wild animals, like they actually are interacting with each other in a very mature and adult-like manner. No, it's not perfect. That's not, and I'm not saying my kids don't act like animals. They definitely have their moments. But overall, they do seem to really enjoy hanging out with each other. And we, as parents, really actually enjoy hanging out with our kids. We really like hanging out as a family. We like doing things together, like just kind of chilling with one another, reading books, playing Legos, whatever, hanging out in the living room together. We do genuinely enjoy doing that. And we would choose to do that over doing, something else we would also find enjoyable and pleasurable. That's how much we actually like being together. We love having conversations with our kids when they feel disappointed or, there's something that's bothering them. I can come to my 3-year-old or 4-year-old and be like, "Hey, is this like, did you find this thing disappointed?" And they say, "Yeah, that was disappointing." And I said, "Well, would you be willing to sacrifice your disappointment to be grateful for, whatever other thing, that you were able to do this thing instead?" And it's like, big sigh. Yeah, I guess, but it just like I love that. Like I love that it's like I'm talking to an an older person in a very small body. And that's something I want to instill in my kids is like the ability to have mature conversations, to be capable of understanding larger concepts and then again being able to kind of articulate that to each other and have like kind of already create these mature sort of relationships now that they can carry on as they get older. Ultimately, we have such control and power to mold and shape our children's actions and behaviors. And there are going to be natural things that in your own personality between you and your spouse, your children will just emulate and they'll just kind of be like you, right? But we have such a power if there are certain things that aren't strengths in us that we want to see in our children, like we have so much power to cultivate being observant, thoughtful, selfless, sacrificial, grateful. But it is kind of hard to kind of cultivate those virtues and try to train them up in your children if you don't naturally possess them yourself. I think of Luke 6:45, where it says, "The good person out of the good treasure of the heart produces good, and the evil person out of evil treasure produces evil. For it is out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks." And I think that's kind of ultimately what I'm trying to get at is like, the things that you want to see in your children have to kind of start within you, right? Like the intentionality, the desire for them to be a virtuous person. If you don't strive for those things in your own life, it's very hard to pass on. Obviously, if those are virtues you don't strive for in your own life, it's hard to pass on. And children are a reflection and an extension of you. They very often reflect your virtues and your vices. They're going to have their own. As they get older, they're going to be their own person. They're going to have those different things. But, at especially in this very fragile stage where in a sense it's easier, I would believe, to put your child on a certain trajectory and hope that that's just going to grow stronger and better as they get older. Anyway, it's definitely hard work. Being intentional is hard work, but it's the best and richest work you will ever do or ever get to pursue. Like there really is no other man-made dream or venture that gives you as much control and power as family life does. Building your family culture, cultivating the vision that you have for your family, growing and raising and forming these little people, your influence is unparalleled to anything else that you are going to put your hands to. So it's definitely something that, is worth putting a lot of time and energy in and talking about with your spouse, or what vision and what kind of culture you want to cultivate for your family. Thanks again for joining me for this Musing Friends. I'll see you next time.